All right, so why don't we get started? So hello everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. Now, before we get started, I'm happy to let you know that we are offering French simultaneous interpretation. So if you could please look down at the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and choose which language you want to listen in. And if you're choosing French, you'll be joining our amazing interpreter, Natalie. So I'll give you a second to do that. Great. So thanks again for attending our webinar, Mobilizing Community Change with Youth at the Center, Lessons Learned from Communities Building Youth Futures. Now, before we dive in, next slide. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the traditional lands of the First Nations people. As part of our commitment to Canada's Truth and Reconciliation process, we recognize the importance of land acknowledgements as one of a small ways of honoring and demonstrating respect for the diverse histories and cultures of all First Nations peoples. So I will start with my land acknowledgement. My name is Rana Namatala, and I am joining you today from Kitchener, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. And recognizing that this space occupies colonized land and out of respect for the rights of Indigenous peoples, it is our collective responsibility to recognize our colonial histories and present-day implications and to honor, protect, and sustain this land. So I invite you all to use the chat to introduce yourself, let us know where you're calling from, and do your own land acknowledgements. Wonderful. Now, please keep doing that while I introduce you to our speakers. So I've introduced myself, but again, my name is Rana Namatala, and I'm the community animator at Tamarack Institute. We also have amazing communities and speakers joining you today. So we have Jackie from CBYF Grand Prairie, Nicole from CBYF Prince Albert. Next slide, please. We have Morgan from CBYF DIGBY, Kiana from CBYF Sudbury, and Morag from CBYF Port La Prairie. We also have Vaughn, who will be joining Jackie and discussing CBYF Grand Prairie. Next slide, please. Great, so today's agenda will be doing three things. One, I'll be giving a little introduction on CBYF, especially for all you folks that are very new to us and want to hear what we do. Next, we'll be having each speaker discuss our 6 priorities, as well as their own community stories and community insights. And lastly, we'll be having a panel Q&A session. So you will be given a chance to ask a bunch of questions and, make sure you're noting them down as people are speaking so that you can ask them at the end. And we'll hopefully get to all of them. Next. Great, so this is our CBYF plan on a page. And let me tell you a little bit about the work that we do. This shares our vision, commitments, process, and impact. So letting you read that a little bit. And we have, did we substitute? No, sorry, continue. So we have a 5-year strategy to work with up to 13 communities across Canada to develop collective impact and system-wide solutions for a minimum of 5,000 youth as they build and act upon plans for their future. So this strategy is funded by the Government of Canada through the Youth Employment and Skills Strategies and delivered by Tamarack Institute. So what we are aiming to achieve in 13 communities is 1, better support youth who face barriers to graduate from high school, improve the lives of youth who transition from high school to post-secondary training and employment, improve engagement of youth, increase the number of community and national partnerships to support the reach and scale of the initiatives. And through this work, we are committed to involving youth as leaders, building upon community strength, engaging in shared evaluation and learning, and implementing collaborative solutions. Next slide, please. Now, CBYF currently has 6 priority areas, and they all emerge from our communities and each of their own plans on a page. So these include employment and mentorship, accessible education, identity and social connection, service navigation, access to supports, youth engagement and leadership, and holistic health and well-being. Now, enough from me. I'll now throw it over to our speakers. Each community will be covering one of our priority areas and sharing insight on what that looks like in their community. So next slide. First up, we have Morag from CBYF Port La Prairie, who will be discussing accessible education, specifically the roving campus project. Go ahead, Morag.
Thank you. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So I'm Morag, and I'm from Port La Prairie, which is Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Dakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I'm here to talk about the roving campus experiment. So this is something that we piloted in the 2021 school year with support from the Community Innovation Fund from the Tamarack Institute. And it's an alternative education project for students who should be entering grade 12 but have poor attendance records and don't have the credits needed to graduate on time. Pictured here are two of the three teachers from the pilot year. So we have Shannon Mulvey and James Kostachek. And so they came up with this idea and brought it to us at CBYF to apply for the Innovation Fund. And they essentially just said, we want to do a bit of an unorthodox experimental classroom for these students to see if we can get them to graduate. So they had three goals, the first being to increase attendance, the second being to educate students for democratic citizenship, which is essentially making sure that these students will be able to thrive in the real world, and then to raise graduation rates. We could move to the next slide, please. So there were a lot of lessons learned, but I picked out three key lessons here. The first being barrier removal is key. So a lot of these students had trouble getting to school. They didn't have anything to eat at school. Those are some of the more obvious ones, but what the teachers did, and they called themselves barrier reductionists, is they got a van so that they could drive students to and from school every day. They made sure there was lunch and snacks available every day. And they also worked with students from the very start with the expectation that students would bring to them the barriers that they're facing, and the teachers would do everything within their power to address those barriers. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of it, but there were quite a few. The second lesson was novelty increases engagement. So from the name of it, you can guess the classroom was roving. It did have a physical location in the school here, but the whole community was their classroom. So they spent a lot of time with their feet on the ground, walking around the community. And then they also would go out of our community for field trips and opportunities for learning. And so students did have a lot of structure in that they got picked up by the same people at the same time every day, but they didn't know where they were going. So there was a lot of surprise still in the school day that would draw them back each day. And the last one, but not least, is prioritizing physical and emotional needs. So going hand in hand with barrier removals, a lot of students had kind of above and beyond what your typical student is struggling with getting to and from school each day. So what teachers would do is they would figure out what medical appointments students needed and take them to those appointments. Or they would figure out, what specialist to connect them with for their eating disorder or for grief. We have one student who lost both of his sisters to overdoses in the span of a year. So there were some pretty significant barriers that students were facing. And first and foremost, those physical and emotional needs needed to be prioritized so that these students could show up to school each day. Next slide, please. And so I'm really excited to share from the pilot year, coming back to the three goals. So the first goal of increasing attendance, we had 95% of the students who improved their attendance, and the median improvement was 36.5%. So we had one student who in grade 11 had attended 0% of his classes, and he attended over 80% of Roaring Campus classes in that pilot year. Our second goal for democratic citizenship, and like I said, this is essentially helping students to thrive in the real world. So a really great way that they did that was setting up certifications. Initially, this wasn't a huge part of the plan, but because of lockdowns, a lot of the planned field trips and lesson plans they had couldn't work. And so they brought a lot of certifications directly into the classroom, such as first aid, safe food handlers, highway flagging, security guard training. And so all of the students received free certifications throughout the year. And because of this, 80% of the students before the school year was over had secured summer employment or long-term employment. And our third goal, no small feat, we had 0% of the students who were on track to graduate at the start of the school year. And by the end of the school year, 100% of them either graduated on time or were on track to graduate on their 19th birthday as mature students with credits that they'd already gotten. So this was a really incredible pilot year. I'm really happy to say that the Roving Campus is still running this current year. We found other funding for it, and we have a really great group of students, and we're already seeing some similar trends the last year. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Morag. That's amazing. And if you saw, Jamie also shared the case study from the Wellbeing campus as well in the chat, so you can learn more about that. Next up, we have Nicole, who will be discussing identity and social connection and their Beyond the Doorstep project.
All right. Hello, everybody. So yeah, my name is Nicole Mathis, and I am from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and homeland of the Métis. Thank you guys for having me. So next slide, please. So today I'm going to be talking about a project that we did for our CIF Round 2 funding, which we called the Pihtikwe, Connecting Prince Albert Youth Beyond the Doorstep. So the name Pihtikwe is a Cree word, and it means inviting a person in. So that name was chosen by youth. We met with youth and discussed what we'd like to name our project, and we chose Pihtikwe, Connecting Prince Albert Youth Beyond the Doorstep. So that's just a little example of our logo there. Next slide, please. So what was the project? So we hired 10 local youth and trained them in media and film production and sent them out to film different organizations and service providers to create videos about what those services had to offer for youth in Prince Albert. So there are a lot of different organizations in Prince Albert that have a lot of great programming. It's just that youth didn't know that it was out there. And so with these videos, we are creating an online directory where youth will be able to go in and access the information about the organization, as well as see a short video about the organization. So we chose to make this directory based on a different directory that was already existing in Prince Albert. The only thing with the directory, it was a bunch of names and numbers, and it was a little intimidating to look at and make those phone calls. There wasn't much information about the services, so youth weren't even aware of what was going on at that organization or how that organization would be able to help them. So we're hoping that through these videos and with this online directory, youth will be able to click in, watch a little video about the organization, and see a bit more about what's going on there just to get a better idea. And the youth who were a part of the project hosted a community agency showcase. So once they went out into the community and started interviewing the different organizations, they were able to host an event. It was supposed to be in person, but with COVID and everything, we had to do it over Zoom, and that's just fine. We were able to have the youth meet with a bunch of different organizations, and they were able to bring their findings to these organizations and explain why this project was so important to them. So right there, I just have linked our website. It's still under construction. It's not necessarily finished yet, but that's something you guys can check out later. So next slide, please. So how did this foster identity and social connection? So through the project, we were able to connect youth with existing resources in our community. So these resources were already out there. We were just able to connect the youth with them. That's the youth who we worked with that we hired in the project, as well as other youth in the community. The youth that we did work with to complete the project felt a sense of connection to the community that they did not feel before. They were able to learn more about the community and the amount of resources that they didn't even know existed. And then through the project, we connected with the Multicultural Action Plan, MCAP, in Prince Albert. And we will be able to add cultural resources to our directory, which is something that's very important to us at CBYF, as well as the youth in our community. They're wanting to learn more about their culture. And so through this, we're able to add those to our directory as well. Next slide. And I just added some quotes in here at the end, just from the youth that were involved in the project, because I think in talking about social identity and connection, these are the answers that we got from the youth. They said that it made them feel like it was a part of the community. It was a great experience getting out of their comfort zone and learning something new. One youth said, "I learned that there's support out there and it is easy to access." Another youth said, "I feel very connected to the community. I feel like I know a lot more about the services available and the volunteer opportunities available. This helps me picture where I'll fit in the future." And that line there, I think, is just so impactful about where they'll fit in their community. And then just a couple more quotes there. The youth that we worked with, it was 10 youth who didn't know each other before and came together and were able to feel like a community within themselves. And that was really exciting too. They were able to learn more about their community and become a part of their community. So next slide. And just to wrap up, I just wanted to put this little plug in here. We created a 20-minute documentary about the project. In the video, you can see a couple of the videos that the youth actually made and hear the youth's experience with the project, and also just learn more about the project itself. So There's a link for the video. We won't be able to show it today because it's 20 minutes long and I only had 5 minutes, but I welcome you guys all to take a look at it. I'm so proud of all the youth that were involved, and it's just a great step in towards identity and social connection in PA. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And Trisha shared a very wonderful quote that you said, which is youth felt like a community within themselves. So thank you for sharing that. And Natalie says, love this idea. Thank you. So next up, we have Kiana, who will be discussing service navigation and access to supports in CBYF Sudbury. Go for it.
So hi, everyone, and thank you, Raina, for the introduction. I am Kiana Dugue, and I am the Community Engagement Coordinator at Future North. Next slide, please. So Future North, I will mention, our place of work is within the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, and it's the traditional territory of the ACKNOWLEDGEMENT, ANIXNABE, and Wahnapitae First Nation. And today I'm going to be talking about service navigation and access to supports in the district of Sudbury and Manitoulin. But one unique thing about our community that we always like to mention is that we do cover a very large district. So as you can see on my slide, the population is over 161,000 people, and it does cover a very large area. So just to give some context, from New Sudbury, where I'm currently located, all the way to the district of Manitoulin that we do cover, that is about a 2 to 2.5 hour drive. So it is quite far, it is quite a big distance. So with that, service navigation and access to supports was quite a big topic that we needed to tackle at Future North for that reason. And as you can see on my slide, we chose to tackle this by first creating our website. So that launched this September. So you can find us at futurenorth.ca or futuredunard.ca. And then on our website, you will find our interactive community map. We also have our social media and our Instagram and Facebook, which is at futurenorth.futuredunard. And then this led to our community spotlights and our IGTVs and screen recordings. So what I'm going to talk about, you will be able to find on our Instagram. So if you want an example, the link is there and you can go navigate to that. But just to give some more context, in the first year of our initiative, one of the main feedbacks that we received from the youth in our network and our directory is that they recognized that there was a lot of resources in Sudbury and Manitoulin, but they were quite difficult to access or navigate just because either these organizations didn't have their own social media accounts, or for instance, they were difficult to find on Google, or even maybe their information was out of date. So even though a lot of our youth knew that there was resources out there for them, it was quite disheartening for them, and they kind of lost hope trying to navigate all of them because there's such a difference in terms of transportation. If you live in Manitoulin and you're trying to access services that are in Sudbury, it's quite overwhelming for youth. So next slide, please. So basically, how did we tackle this? So first, we really started with our website, as I mentioned. And on our website, you will find our community interactive map, which is basically what we like to think of as a hub. So it's basically a place that any youth in the community can go to, or anyone in our community for that matter. So let's take, for instance, if we have a youth who is looking for mental health resources, maybe they're looking for a counselor that works particularly with youth. What they can do is go on our website, navigate to the community map, and then underneath the community map, there's going to be subcategories. So for instance, one of them would be mental health. They would click that, and then they will be able to see an actual live map that will show them all the resources that are available in their area. And let's say they want to pick the one that's only a 15-minute walking distance from their home. They would click that one, and on there, you will be able to find the phone number, a contact person, a brief description of the service, as well as an email address or a website. And this can be the same for volunteer services, education, employment. We are currently working on building more resources on this community map as we speak. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we will have more and more, and we'll continue to build on that. But I think this is really important because we noticed that we had a really great outpouring of positive feedback because it allowed youth to navigate to one area where they could have all the resources. So it was a lot less overwhelming. The work was already done for them. And then we noticed that it might have been a little more difficult because a lot of youth don't necessarily like to go to websites. So to kind of bring the attention to our website and our community map, that's when we decided to do our community spotlights on our Instagram and our Facebooks. So on there, you will find our IGTVs. So we basically have been partnering with the communities, organizations, and we call them our community spotlights. So the one that we have live now is with YMCA Employment Services. And they were gracious enough to conduct an interview with us. And we were basically able to talk to the director of the program, and she answered all of our questions. And we basically just tried to come up with all the questions that youth in our area might have. So in the interview, she answers all the questions. She gives a brief description of what the service will be. And then there's also screen recording. So in this IGTV, we included a screen recording with a step-by-step process so that youth know exactly how to go on our website, go to the community map, and just navigate it all, because I think technology can be quite overwhelming for some. And this hopefully just removes some of those barriers. And again, we noticed a huge positive outpouring with that, because we noticed that by linking it to our Instagram, it was a little more youth friendly. It was a lot more fun for everyone, and it was a lot less intimidating. So by having it on our Instagram, they were able to click the link, watch how to do it, see that it's quite easy, and then go on their own time when they were felt comfortable doing so. So we really learned that the key to helping youth access supports and to navigate those resources in our community is to get on their level, get on their page, and really to discover what they want and to listen to them. So one of the main feedbacks was they all loved Instagram. So we've had a huge hit with our Instagram account, and we're going to continue building on that. And I think it's really helped youth just be a lot less scared of the resources and to just be aware of what's in their community. Next slide, please. And that is all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiana. I got a lot of comments. We got community map. Oh my gosh, that is a very great idea from Vaughn. Trisha says, yes, love the user-centeredness of the idea. And Natalie says, yes, loving all the online directory ideas. Yeah, thank you all. We love making resources and services more accessible, especially for youth. So thank you all for giving us a great example of that. And I think we can all agree that we're very excited to see how that community map turns out as well. So thank you. Next up, we have Morgan, who will be discussing holistic health and well-being in CBYF DIGBY. Take it away, Morgan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan. I'm the CBYF coordinator here in DIGBY. Thank you very much for having me today. So what I would like to touch on today is through our innovation funds, we were able to create a youth space. And so these are some pictures here. So we were able to create it in collaboration with our Youth Connections team, some of our co-op students, and with youth input, as well as some community partners. And so in this space, as you can see in some of these photos here, we have a hangout spot, a spot for youth to sit and chat. We have some things painted on the wall. Next slide, please. And we also have a space where youth can do homework, read a book. We have a free store. And so when we were trying to come up with the idea, our Youth Connections team really wanted a spot for youth where they felt that they could go to do homework, to hang out with friends, and just be an overall safe space for youth. And so this really has become the space for youth. And so because of this, we've had some community partners reach out to us and also want to utilize the space. And so a community partner was able to host an emotional wellness course throughout the summer here, which was really great. And so throughout our innovation fund, we tried to do a series of different programs and working with our Youth Connections team. And so something that came up quite a few times is that youth were facing many mental health challenges due to COVID-19 and everything going on in the world. And so we were able to put on a mental health workshop training for our Youth Connections team members, as well as some other youth from the community, to be able to support themselves and to support others in the community, which was really awesome. Another story I'd like to highlight too is we were able to do some lunch and learn series at the beginning of the pandemic. And so these were a series of sessions to teach students around life skills for life after high school. And so we had many things planned. Like we had some tax sessions, we had some sessions around time management. And so as we started to implement this program, a lot of youth were saying, these are great, but these are not what we're interested in right now. There's a lot of things happening in the world. And this was a couple weeks after the pandemic had first began. And so we decided to shift focus and to focus on some sessions to help support them during that time. So we were able to do some sessions on how to cope with COVID-19, how to cope with grieving, just recognizing that many youth were no longer able to see their friends or were no longer able to take part in different activities. Some youth weren't able to walk across the stage at graduation. And so those are all different forms of grief. And so how do you deal with all of those feelings that come up? And so we were able to, work with community partners to be able to put that on. And so throughout the Innovation Fund and throughout the Lunch and Learn program, we learned many different things. And so one of them being that youth input and feedback is very important. And just recognizing too that, youth know what they need and being able to listen to that. And also being flexible and adaptable. Because I know a lot of times we put a lot of time into planning and a lot of thought into things, but if that's not where the energy is, being able to move towards that. And so through this, youth were able to learn different ways to support themselves and to support others. And they felt heard and valued. And they were also able to gain a lot of leadership skills and training throughout this as well. And so we hope that this can continue to be a space where youth feel welcome, that they can go to. And we've had many youth being able to just stop in as well, which has been really awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Morgan. Have some comments in the chat. Emma said, I took some training in this space last month and it was cozy. Thank you for creating it. Vaughn said, love the action taken based on youth feedback. Trista said, youth know what they need, which I also love because I love prioritizing the idea that youth are experts on their own lives. So thank you so much for creating so many safe spaces for youth. All right, next up, we have Jackie and Vaughn, who will be discussing youth engagement and leadership, specifically youth co-chairs.
Thanks, Rana. My name is Jackie. I use she, her pronouns. I want to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Grand Prairie, which is Treaty 8 territory, territory of Beaver, Cree, Dene, and Homeland of Métis people. And I'm going to let Vaughn go ahead and do a quick introduction as well before we get started.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vaughn. I use she, they pronouns. I'm the youth co-chair of the leadership table with Grand Prairie CBYF. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be here. So thank you for having me.
I'm really happy you're here too, Vaughn, because it's always better to have youth voice involved than just providing input on the back end of things, which you were able to gather from a few of our different co-chairs. So we'll maybe flip the slide over if we can. So throughout this, you'll see a couple of different quotes that we gathered from youth co-chairs, community members who are co-chairing, just to integrate their feedback, but a little bit of history on how we got to youth co-chairs in Grand Prairie. It wasn't like this brilliant brainchild where it was going to be best practice and everything would be perfect. We had a bunch of community members or adults at this very small leadership table who were saying, I don't have capacity to chair this table. I'm chairing other things in the community. I do not have the capacity. Like, I really don't want to do it because it's going to stretch me too thin. And one of our members of our leadership table, one of the adults there, had said, why don't we see if we can get a youth to co-chair? And instead of us telling you which adult is going to chair alongside them, we'll let the youth decide. And so our youth kind of unanimously decided that either they had capacity to step forward to be considered as a chair or didn't. And Vaughn was kind of the one who said, I have capacity. This is something I want to do, and was supported by the other youth in that bid. And so from there, we went to a conversation to provide some safety around that decision. And we said, Vaughn, you tell me who you think you want to co-chair with. You've been at a few meetings. You've got some relationships with some of these people. And Vaughn said, I want to co-chair with Krista. And so I went to Krista and said, you've been identified as like top choice for a co-chair. Would you do that? And instead of Krista saying, no, I don't have capacity to do that, Krista said, if that's something that the youth of our community are asking for and they feel like I'm a good fit, then I will step up into that role. So it was kind of a way to get adults at the leadership table as well to invest. And what we ended up with was a model that we followed through all of our action teams. So we now have 5 different tables meeting, and each of those tables has kind of followed a similar process of getting a co-chair in place, a youth co-chair, and then getting an adult co-chair to sit alongside them as kind of a capacity building practice, as well as some support there, and making sure that we have good footing in the community with people who are well known as well. So that's how we got started. I'm going to throw things over to Vaughn to talk about a little bit of how that's resulted in community impact.
Thank you, Jackie. So in terms of how this is, come out in community impact, at least in my personal experience, I've had such a positive experience within Grand Prairie CBYF. It is such an empowering space for youth. And I think it really just sets the tone for the entire initiative and grounds us, because we're putting youth voice at the forefront always. It's within our structures, it's in our terms of reference. It is ingrained in every single Discord chat that we put in and ask for that youth voice and that youth to guide conversation. There's something really freeing about finally being told, here you go, it's your turn. We allow failure here because it's how you grow, and we honor your ability because it deserves to be recognized, and I think that honestly, it's set up a lot of amazing groundwork in terms of interpersonal relationships with youth, and taking our voice and making it impact community change. Yeah, that's my little take on it anyway. I'll pass it back over to Jackie because I like to ramble.
Thanks, Vaughn. The next question we kind of had as a prompt to consider this presentation was, how many youth did you impact? And although we kind of think like data is important and knowing the numbers is important, we don't love the idea of measuring the impact of this practice by the number of youth who are co-chairing in our community. So we do have about 5 to 7 youth who will have the opportunity to co-chair each year in our community across our tables. But more broadly, I think the practice sets the tone within our community and sets the tone for what CBYF will be in Grand Prairie. Youth are seen as decision makers and people in decision-making positions. At times we might have other youth who aren't as involved in CBYF saying like, well, is this really youth voice? Is this really youth led? Or having concerns about, how is a decision made? And as soon as that concern is brought to our leadership table, it goes not to a chairperson to do top down, adults are saying this, youth voice is prioritized, don't worry about it. It goes to an adult and a youth co-chair who navigate that conversation around, it's not top down. It's not us telling you that there's youth voice involved or that we're trying to address youth priorities. A youth co-chair is having that conversation with the person who might be questioning, right? And there's behind the scenes conversations around that, and capacity building for sure with our youth co-chairs. But what happens is we have better optics in our community because that youth then goes and says, well, I talked to other youth who are making decisions. So we are youth led. And although it's a little bit more complicated to get there, we have our community really seeing that youth are the decision makers and are leading the charge in CBYF Grand Prairie. And we're not just putting lip service to this idea of youth led. It is, even if there's conflict, even if there's disagreement, you will see youth voice. And that example has kind of fed through other areas of CBYF Grand Prairie. Vaughn mentioned our Discord server. We have youth moderators there. So youth are moderating respectful places online without needing to have adults say, you can't have that conversation, or you can't say that, or that was disrespectful. The vast majority of the time, youth are moderating themselves. Youth are asking one another, can you be kind? Or I didn't like how that made me feel. And that comes, I think, from a place of us empowering youth and saying, this is your initiative. We're on our next slide, so that's exactly where we need to be. I'm going to pass it over to Vaughn to talk about what skills and opportunities have been developed.
Thank you, Jackie. Again, so in terms of skills and opportunities, as a youth co-chair, there are a lot of interesting lessons that are to be learned. Youth aren't often given opportunity to have leadership in this way, right? We are often told, hey, here's a panel. You can talk to a bunch of adults who are going to make decisions with or without your input. You can say yes or no to attend. You know what I mean? But here you get to learn how to manage a meeting. You get to learn how to build an agenda from the ground up with intention and care and putting those interpersonal relationships first. We learned how to have fun and integrate laughter and vulnerability and honesty into meetings. It doesn't have to be as cut and dry as a to-do list and, okay, well, we need this many volunteers here and we need to socialize the plan this day and this, and that, and this is about recruitment. Sometimes it's just about having those relationships and wanting to spend time together because that's where community work starts. And yeah, the best skill that I've gained from being a youth co-chair is that agenda piece. You know, I didn't know how to construct a to-do list and create meaningful conversation and get people to engage with each other until having this opportunity. Yeah, so that's what I have to say about that.
Thanks, Vaughn. We'll get you to flip the slide here right away. So this is another quote from another one of our co-chairs saying it is kind of daunting, not in a bad way. It's just this immense thing that can be a little humbling. It's inspiring. It's definitely the scope. It can feel like you're responsible for so much, but having co-chairs and other team members that take blunders in stride and support you in your leadership definitely helps. And I think that speaks a little bit to the vulnerability piece that Vaughn had mentioned. Our tables are not built with the expectation of perfect performance. Our tables are built to provide capacity building opportunities, to make mistakes, to try again, to not get to the outcome the first time you tried, the first way you tried it. And I guess some of the things that we're learning as we go through this process, one, like Vaughn mentioned, you will laugh way more when you focus on some of those relationships and having youth at the table. And sometimes it starts out as nervous laughter and uncertainty, and it just ends up with adults feeding the inside joke or fueling the fire, and we end up in knots in the middle of a meeting, which is fabulous. Another is that if you're going to have high expectations of youth, you have to match those expectations with high support. So this is not a path to efficient meeting planning. That is not what we're proposing. We have 5 different tables meeting, 5 sets of co-chairs, and that means before every one of those monthly meetings, we have another planning meeting beforehand so that we can build that agenda by consensus. We have co-chairs texting after hours. We have co-chairs jumping on the Discord server and asking questions or asking for a link. And if you're going to have youth at the table as decision makers, you have to be able to provide some support. And if your expectations are high, the support has to be high too. You can't say we expect the world from you, but here's $5, have a nice day. And the other one that I'll mention is what we found in this process is that pre-existing relationships really matter. We have 5 different tables, but the tables where we have our youth co-chairs 8, 9, 10 months later are the tables where those youth had relationships with their co-chairing partner before CBYF, or had a chance to be in CBYF with that person for a significant period of time. And it seems like that relationship is what holds youth in those leadership roles. It's getting to laugh with people they know. I had a meeting last week, and after the meeting, we stay on the line in case someone has questions, and it turned into a free-for-all laughter fest / political debate with the co-chairs and the staff, who were the only ones on the call. But they like spending time together and they knew each other before they got to the table. If there isn't that relationship, we've definitely found that youth tend to drop off and say, I don't have capacity to do this anymore, because there isn't that supportive relationship there from the start. And they feel like I either have to be all in or all out, where these other relationships, Vaughn will speak maybe a little bit more to it, are a little bit more nuanced in saying, if you can't make it, I understand. I know who you are as a person. So I'm going to let Vaughn have the last word on this, and we're going to flip our slide one last time and we'll finish up.
Awesome. So I'll just read the quote that's up here because it really spoke to me when Jackie shared it with me before the presentation. It says, having a co-chair who is a youth and recognizing they might have other stuff going on in their life that impacts their ability to be a co-chair in the capacity that grown-ups might want them to requires some compassion and patience. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I've had my camera off this entire time. Meetings give me anxiety. I love speaking. I love leadership positions. I think it is one of my callings in life, but it is not something that I can always confront to the best of my ability. I am an autistic, non-binary, neurodivergent person, and sometimes I need different things, and we value that within CBYF, and we meet people within their capacity. We allow them to show up and better communicate their needs and support in an open environment. We work collaboratively to make sure that they are allowed to show up when they need to, and your capability isn't limited to your inconsistency because of your own things that you have going on, because we're human and sometimes we need to reshape our expectations within leadership and, focus on empowering each other and allowing ourselves to feel strong even when we may feel weak. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Vaughn. Back to you, Rana.
Thank you both. That was amazing. We have many comments in the chat. I'll read some of them. As Julia says, what a great way to engage youth in a meaningful way. Trisha quoted Vaughn. Amazing quotes from Vaughn today. There's something really freeing about being told, here you go, it's your turn, we accept failure here. Kate says, all tables need to be built this way. Love this. Natalie says, high expectations equals high support. Great reminder. We got a lot of thank you, Vaughns. Vaughn, this is amazing. Thank you. Well said, Vaughn. Amazing, Vaughn. And thanks for your vulnerability, Vaughn. One of the greatest qualities of a leader. Thank you for that, Tina. And thank you, Jackie and Vaughn. That was amazing. It's amazing that you not only prioritize youth voice, but you prioritize their needs and also the relationships that you create with them. So thank you so much. And thank you all to our communities for sharing your stories. We will now be moving on to our Q&A section. So all those questions that have been bubbling up inside, we can finally ask them. So put some questions in the chat that you want to ask, either specific communities or all of them as a whole, and I'll ask them for you. So go ahead, I'll give you some time to do that. We can actually start by one question that I saw earlier from Becky, and it was any recommendations for community mapping programs or software? And I saw that Morag shared one resource, but Kiana, what do you use for your community map?
So I think one thing that we really strive to do at Future North is to not duplicate services. So we kind of looked at our team and realized I would consider myself an Instagram pro. I love Instagram, but I'm not the techiest person. So behind the backlogs of having to do a community map is quite technical. So we actually outsourced that to an amazing company. So we work with Katrina Advertising in Sudbury, and then we also work with the companies that they use for their tech side of things. And then we also have a wonderful professional in the community who is also doing her placement hours. And she basically helps us search for all of these resources and talks to the youth in the community. And then she kind of makes a list, and then we send that back to the tech company and they kind of input it all for us. But because we are bilingual, it definitely is a long process. So there is a lot of backlog to that. So I would definitely suggest just looking into your community to see if there's any companies that are willing to donate services or donate some time, or even to just do like a consultation Zoom. We did a lot of those, and that was really helpful because for the non-tech people on our team, it just allowed us all to understand, and now we can all know a little bit more than we did before.
Thank you. And Becky says, thank you, very helpful. Let me also share one more time the resource that Morag shared. Let me read one of the other questions. Okay, so Jamie asks, what ways have you found to enable and center Indigenous knowledges in relation to your work? Nicole, why don't you start?
All right, so like I had mentioned, with our project, we're working really closely with MCAP, which is the Multicultural Action Team. I think I got that wrong, but we're working with them to work towards getting more cultural resources out there for the youth. And they are already a working action team within our community. And so we're excited to partner with them to get those resources out there to youth. In other ways, we've been working on different ways to connect youth with elders in our community. And we created a graphic called How to Connect with Your Elder, and different ways for youth to reach out, because that's something that was also just really unknown in our community, like being able to connect with your culture in your community. So in PA, yeah, we're working with different coalitions and different things that are already out there. Somebody said, I think it was Kiana said, not wanting to repeat things that are already existing. And so just being able to connect youth with what's already out there. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Next question is from Trisha. If there's one thing you'd like to share with an audience of change makers like this group, what would you like to share? Morag, what do you think?
Just one, hey? I would say really tying in with what a lot of folks talked about in their presentations, but just youth are the experts. I'm lucky that our whole team here in Portage is all under the age of 30. We're all youth. And that also really allows us to connect really well with other youth. And I think a lot of the other communities, as shown today, have done an incredible job of making sure that youth voices are really centered and considered, and you know, being able to pivot your work when youth come to you and say, not so much, do it this way instead. But yeah, youth are the experts of their own lives, and we got to listen.
Thank you. Morgan, how about you? What would you like to share with an audience of change makers?
Yeah, I would just like to build on that too. Yeah, youth know best. And so I think that we've seen that a lot in our work. And so oftentimes, unfortunately, people try to speak on behalf of youth. And so allowing youth to really have that opportunity to share. So whether that be allowing them to speak at the beginning of meetings, or really trying to take a step back and really listen, are all really important ways of doing that. And also, yeah, help to make sure that youth feel included within that as well. Because a lot of youth tend to drop out if they don't feel like they're being heard. Because unfortunately, sometimes their voices may not be able to be heard as loud as some others in the room. So yeah, so just kind of building on some of those points that were always shared.
Thank you. We have a question to Kiana from Vaughn. Kiana says, your work in your community spoke to me. I was wondering about the interview piece with the YMCA director. How did you gather the questions? Was it through youth survey, developed by Backbone staff, from observation, a combination? So curious.
Yes, I would definitely say it was a combination of all of the above. So we do at Future North have a youth expert panel. So it's basically currently, I think we're at 12 to 15 members that are all youth from various backgrounds. So I would say the age range is from 15 to maybe late 20s. And they all have very diverse cultural backgrounds. So we always bring this to our table. So before we do anything like our community spotlights, we always bring them to the meetings, have their input, have their feedback, just to get their perspective. So that was collected, as well as we did a little bit of a road trip with Future North. So we went out to organizations, we spoke to youth in the community, and we kind of just asked them, like, what do you wish you knew more about? If you could talk to directors from programs, what questions would you ask them? And then we were really lucky to sit in on a meeting before we actually did the interview with their youth council at the YMCA. So there was youth there who were in their programs, who were actually completing work, and we were able to ask them questions like, before you started, what do you wish you would have known about these programs? What was difficult to navigate before you got into this program? And we kind of just combined all of that together to really get our questions. And I think as a youth myself and as a young person myself, I was really able to reflect on my experiences in high school, in university, and what I wish I would have known. So I think it was a combination of all of that, and trying to fit it into a 3 to 4 minute interview was quite difficult, but I think we managed.
Wonderful, thank you. Emily asks for Nicole, how long were the youth contracts for the youth video project? How many hours per week were expected?
Hey, I did just put a quick little in the chat, just I wasn't sure if I'd be able to answer it out loud. But what I said was that we actually hired the youth back in July, and we're just wrapping up the project now. And how we did it, so our project was completely youth-led, and we understand that youth are busy, have other things going on, and especially once it became fall, school started back up. And so what we did instead was we set deadlines so that the youth would be able to go at their own pace. So the youth needed to do all of the contacting of the agencies, set up the meetings, set up the filming dates. So they were able to do that on their own time when they were able to. And then as long as they were hitting those deadlines for when the videos were coming back. So there weren't really hours per week. It was more just an open, this is when it's needing to get done.
Amazing. Thank you, Nicole. We have a comment from Atulia, not a question, but the Northern Council for Global Cooperation worked with 8 Northern youth on a youth-led research project to understand the ways youth are engaging with global issues. And they left a link out there for you. Thank you for sharing that. Next up, we have a question for Morgan from Vaughn. Your shift within community to COVID-focused supports for youth made me so happy. Do you have anything more to tell us about that specific project? What did you guys do? Definitely not asking for myself.
Yeah, so with the Lunch and Learn program, with that shift, what we had done is we had initially planned to do in-person sessions, but due to COVID, it had to be moved to online. So the concept of the Lunch and Learn was that we wanted to provide a healthy meal for youth, but we also wanted to connect them with some community partners. So every session that we did, we invited a community partner or someone that worked within that field to come in and speak, so that can make that connection for them. Just recognizing it can be a little scary to try to access a support or service or a business and not know who people are. And so trying to make that connection for them. And so we had to, then shift to online. So rather than having food, we were able to deliver gift cards, food gift cards for youth. And so we were also able to do the sessions online. So we had asked the community partners and speakers to record a session prior to, and then we played it for youth. And then we had a Q&A session afterwards. And so throughout the process, we really wanted to make sure that youth felt that they had input through all of it. So we did a feedback form at the end of every session. And so that's when we started to recognize that some of the topics we had were great, but they weren't really what youth really wanted to be focused on during that time. And so we were able to quickly shift and find some new speakers to be able to speak on those different topics, because we really wanted to make sure the topics we were covering were important to youth and felt valuable to them.
Great, thank you, Morgan. I do notice that we're running out of time, so let's do this last question. So Emma asks, do you have any advice for ways to call adults in when they feel uncomfortable with empowering youth to take action / lead work on potentially sensitive topics, for example, sexual violence? Jackie, what do you think?
Well, I was just typing a long reply to Emma. I think that maybe a good starting point is to find someone in your community who can act as a bridge between the people who are saying youth can't and youth who are saying we want. Whether that's an older youth who is more connected with adults. I am not a youth in our community. I'm 2 years too old, but I find I often sit in that role where I say that's not what our youth are asking for. They're beyond that. Context, it's in a school. So I would say the way that we started some of those uncomfortable conversations was around a common agenda. And so that plan on a page that Rana shared around CBYF, each community has our own. And one of the topics that youth mentioned when we were talking about how do we address education and employment gaps for youth in our community was the youth were the ones who said comprehensive sex ed is a problem in our community. And it's adults who are like, I don't know if I want to talk about that. Maybe it's sensitive, but the youth put it on the table to start with. And the common agenda was agreed to by everyone in our community. We spent a lot of time socializing that and getting it out into community. So we can't disagree with the fact that it needs to be addressed. And because the youth were the ones who put it on the table, it's hard for adults to push back and say, you're not capable of having the conversation. And honestly, at the table where that's being discussed, it's primarily youth led with some older adults being like, that's an uncomfortable topic for me. I don't know if I understand that exactly, or what that would look like for LGBTQ2S plus folks. And the youth are like, if you're willing, we'll teach you. Come sit down with us. We'll tell you what the gaps are, because they're getting information that adults don't necessarily seek out or have the capacity to attach to, whether it's through TikTok or through Instagram. So inviting them in and saying, tell us what you know, tell us what you think, rather than putting words in their mouth and saying, let's discuss this sensitive topic over here, and then meet them where they're at. If they say, like, we just want to talk about consent without using the T analogy, don't get Vaughn started on the T analogy, then hear them. And yeah. So I would say maybe start with a conversation and see where your youth are at, and then meet them there, and don't be afraid of difficult conversations. Vaughn, do you have anything to add about the T analogy or your thoughts on this?
Definitely not the T analogy. We're running out of time. I do just have to say, sometimes it's okay to just look at each other when you're facing those difficult conversations and acknowledge that sometimes there's no common ground. Sometimes y'all just don't got a lot in common because there's a barrier there within generational gaps, and it's okay. And sometimes that's the first step to becoming self-aware and finding a solution. If that makes any sense, I don't know.
It does. Thank you so much, Vaughn. And we're out of time actually. So thank you all again for attending our webinar. I hope you all enjoyed it. And thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for inspiring change today and inspiring change every single day. And also thank you for our tech support, Jamie and Kimber, and our interpreter, Natalie. Amazing. Thank you all for coming. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.